Nitro with the nice flow. Y'all acting like y'all don't know. Stop acting like y'all don't know.
Joe Campbell.
Who the future? We the future. Who the future? Us. Who the future? We the future. Who the future? Us. Causing chaos in the back of the bus. Get your hands up. We gon' show you how we buzz. Yeah. The future.
The future is now on a Suddenly Not So Casual Free Friday. It is CFB Knowledge for College Week 4. It is the Shark and the Gun. Friday, September 23rd, 2022. The first Friday of the fall. I couldn't be more excited to be here. Guns Picks. What's going on tonight, brother?
Man, feeling good, feeling great. Going into week 4, we absolutely profited last week. The Shark brought in 3.32 units for the boys. I only had 0.8, but we have given the people 12 units up on this show alone in the past 2 weeks. So you have to keep following us because we are not cooking with gas, not cooking with propane. We are cooking with napalm, baby. I'm ready for week 4. Let's do it.
And we are not waiting around as usual. 12 p.m. We are going Big 12. We are going to Ames, Iowa. Iowa State revenge game. 31-29 loss last year at Baylor. Baylor comes in here as an underdog. Guns Picks an official.
Hey, I'm telling you what. It's making me think Campbell, it might be the coach for Iowa State because this team was supposed to lose a ton of games this year. They're sitting here 4-0. If you would have told me early in the season that Iowa State was 4-0, I would probably tell you that you're the craziest person in the entire world. But I digress here. They're sitting here in this game after a Baylor blowout of Texas State, 42-7, and dominated plus 233 net yard average in that run. But Baylor wants to run the ball. That's exactly what they want to do. They average 235 yards per game, 5.4 yards per carry, but they only pass the game 28 attempts per game. So they're very heavy on the run, less on the pass. Now, Iowa State rush defense has done well this year, holding their opponents at 2.6 yards per carry and 60 yards per game on the ground. So this Iowa State defense is going to be absolutely ready. And you hit the spot here, folks. Revenge spot for Iowa State. They lost to Baylor 31-29 as 7-point favorites. They did not cover, so they got absolutely upset in this game. It was a very shocker, and it actually launched Baylor into one of the top teams in the Big 12. That was the launching point, that game alone. So they want that one bad. Home team in this game has won 4 straight up in this spot, and the number is sitting at -2.5. I love the play. I think Iowa State is a good team after seeing them finally beat their big brother, baby brother, twin brother in Iowa. I think this is going to carry over in this game, revenge spot style. Give me Iowa State -2.5 as the play.
Yeah, and of course, the revenge angle is always a solid jumping off point, particularly in conference, particularly in big conference, Big 12 football. I'm going big conference, but I'm going across to the legendary, if you will, SEC. And we're going to Auburn. We're going 12 noon, and we are going Jordan-Hare Stadium. And we're going back to what was the correct idea last week that just didn't come through because of situational outliers. This is the 4th consecutive home game for Auburn to open the campaign, but this is their conference opener. Last week, they got absolutely hammered by Penn State 41-12. We were on the first half. And if you look at that first half, chip shot field goal, turnovers down deep. That is the recipe to not cover spreads when you were actually in control of possession and game flow. And that was the Auburn Tigers last week. They were in control. They gave it away. Penn State, a far, far more representative opponent than Missouri. Missouri comes in here, bottom feeder status within the SEC. 2 home wins. Unimpressive. Abilene Christian, Louisiana Tech, week 2 out of conference at Kansas State, obliterated on a similar game figure, -7. Kansas State, 42-12. Auburn on the same figure. Auburn bounced back 0-2 first half, last 2 dating back to a San Jose State disaster. Prior official play, first half, -4, 1 unit. We are going to Lawrence, Kansas, and Guns Picks is talking to me about Duke University football on a Suddenly Not So Casual. Send it Saturday. It will be.
Look, I can't say it enough. I know Kansas is a good team. Man, they come from back-to-back road wins. They go and they beat West Virginia. They go and beat Houston. Even though they lost the yardage battle in both those games, are minus 82 net yards against Western Virginia and minus 8 net yards versus Houston. Their offense has been playing absolutely well, 543 yards per game. And their rushing offense is absolutely on fire, 259 on the ground, 7.1 yards per carry. Now you have this Duke team that has kind of sneakily been coming in here undefeated, 3-0 this season, plus 112 net yard average in that run. Their offense is absolutely electric too. 460 yards per game of total offense, and their run game is absolutely strong, 205 yards per game, 5.9 yards per carry. Duke on this one versus non-conference opponents historically has done well, 32-9 against the spread versus non-conference opponents. And on the side for Kansas, they're favored against a Power 5 team, the first time since 2009. 5-13 against the spread as a home favorite overall in their last 18 occurrences. So I think this is one of those short line, kind of trappy games. I got it at 7.5, and I think Duke is one of those good takes when they are a dog, especially on the road, and Kansas in the same spot. They're a good dog. I don't think they're a good favorite, though. This is a play-on team later down the road, however. I just don't think it's here. Give me Duke plus 7.5 as the play.
Yeah, and we discussed this off the record. Of course, conversation wins in this life. We have disagreement here. I am on Kansas minus 7 officially. The data does speak. However, I do think you need to go through what we talk about very often on this show with college football teams, looking at where they began last year and where they finished last year, and if it translated and flowed into this season. Lance Leopold came over here from Buffalo, revamped the Buffalo program within the MAC, came over here, took over for Les Miles, who had basically disrupted an already terrible program and made it even worse. Lance Leopold inherited a bad roster and truly awful energy within the program last year. The team started out the campaign 1-8 and 0-6 in conference straight up. However, they put second year quarterback Jalen Daniels in against Kansas State at home and lost, and it all changed the following week. An outright win at Texas, 57-56 in overtime. A cover at TCU, a home cover against West Virginia, and then they opened up this campaign, the first time laying points in a long time, an absolute blowout winner, 31-point line, 56-10 against Tennessee Tech. Then they went on the road and beat West Virginia, should have lost last week theoretically because they were too hot, hammered Houston. This is where I reset the average. This is a new Kansas program, and you get a revenge game. Duke hammered them last year at home, 55-23 on a minus 16. Huge line move in terms of a revenge matchup. And then you go to Duke and you look at Duke. Duke is 3-0 on the campaign. Fool's gold. Beat Temple at home 30-0. Beat a poor, weakened Northwestern team in the Big Ten, 31-23. A Northwestern team that just lost to Southern Illinois last week. And then they beat North Carolina A&T at home, an FCS team. All boxes checked for me. 1 unit play, Kansas minus 7. 3:30 p.m., SEC battle. One of the top ranked matchups of the week. Tennessee Volunteers at home in Knoxville, catching the Florida Gators in a rivalry game. A hell of a watch. Entertainment will be high. And the Gun has 2 official plays, first half and game. Talk to me.
Look, when you look at this game here, Florida's absolutely owned Tennessee historically. In the last 16 matchups, Florida has won 15 of those straight up. But this is a different Tennessee team, my friends. And when you actually look at the lines in this one, 9 times out of 10, Tennessee has been a double-digit dog or a short dog. The last time they were favored was 2016 as 4.5-point favorites. Tennessee ended up winning that game and covering by 10. Now you see them sitting here at minus 10. Let's look at this Florida team for a second. Look, they come off this great win against Utah, probably a Utah team that they shouldn't have beaten if it wasn't for a pick in the red zone. This team has absolutely struggled since then. They barely beat USF last week and actually lost the net yardage battle by 73 yards to South Florida. I mean, absolutely terrible. Granted, this is probably a look-ahead spot to Tennessee. Tennessee has struggled to stop in the run, too. 5.9 yards per carry to Utah, 6.2 yards per carry to USF. And they'll face a Tennessee team that can run the ball with Jalen Wright, and the elusive Hendon Hooker has legs as well. Now you look at this Florida team first. They want to run the ball under Bill Napier. That's his style. 6.4 yards per carry so far this season, while Tennessee has done well at stopping the run. 2.8 yards per carry to their opponents. But they've done it against a weaker schedule, so we don't know if that's going to predicate in this game, but I think it should. Now you have the home team at 6-1 against the spread, 5-2 straight up in this matchup. Houston, Tennessee, revenge spot for them. They lost as 19-point dogs straight up and against the spread 38-14 last year, and now they are 10-point favorites. The first time, like I said, since 2016 when they won and covered. Key points here, folks. 19-point dog to a 10-point favorite in 1 year. That should tell you something about this Tennessee team. This ain't your daddy's Tennessee team, folks. The Vols will absolutely blow out the Florida Gators, in my opinion. So give me Tennessee for the game, -10, and give me the first half, because I think they're going to absolutely go at them at the throat and never take their foot off their necks. -6.5 first half play as well.
Yeah, and that's a snapshot also to a way you can handicap college football without knowing anything about the teams. You look at the first half split, when you see a 6.5 on a 10, that is 65% of the full game weighting in the first half. It's telling you a story, as you mentioned. Revenge game, huge line gap. This is not your daddy's. It might be your grandfather's if your grandfather grew up in the 90s with Peyton Manning. But we stay centered and we go from a ranked matchup to an absolute grease fire special. I love to look at these games because that's where you really find talent gaps and you find really potential blowout specials. We're taking Temple, the Owls, at home at 2 p.m. at -9.5, 1 unit. When you look at what's going on in this game, look no further than the UMass Minutemen coming off an outright win. That is only their third outright win in the last 4 seasons. Their previous 2 wins, they did go on the road the following week, and they got hammered by Florida State 59-3 back when Florida State was not very good. And they got hammered by Florida International, who is not very good, 44-0. Temple is a bye team this season. Temple last week competed really to the buzzer with Rutgers. Rutgers did get there on them 16-14. The previous week, in a high line theoretically for historical Temple football at home, they did lay 14.5 points against Lafayette, and they did cover the game. The game was tight on the spread. It was 30-14 on a 14.5, so they covered it by 1.5 points, but they absolutely dominated the game. They had, I think, 2-1 yards gained, and it was just an absolute obliteration. UMass does not back up success with success. UMass is an absolute bottom feeder. 2 p.m., Temple, -9.5, 1 unit. Staying in the center of the country here, Cincinnati, not the Bengals, the Bearcats are at home this week off a non-cover last week at Miami of Ohio out of the MAC. They catch Indiana coming in here out of the Big Ten. Guns picks -16.5, an official.
Look, I don't know how this Indiana team is sitting here 3-0 straight up. They've played Illinois, Idaho, and WKU, Western Kentucky, for all those that don't know the initials. Not the strongest competition overall, but they only have a +6 point differential, -14 net yard average. They were -86 net yards versus Illinois, -61 versus Western Kentucky. Now you have this Cincinnati team that is basically their season's been predicated off the loss against Arkansas, but they basically lost due to a -1 turnover ratio in that game. They made a few drives, but they ended up giving the ball back, and that cost them not only the cover, but the loss straight up. Both teams have good offenses. Their defense for Indiana, however, is a little bit rough. They give up 441 yards per game, 64.4 pass completion rate. Now, Cincinnati's defense, you know what they can do? They can give the quarterback fits, especially with their passing game, only giving up 150 yards per game in the pass with an 11.3% sack rate. That means they are terrors, and they're going after the quarterback. In Indiana, that's where their offense is. That's what they do. They score 300-plus passing yards per game right now. They put it up on Illinois. They put it up on Western Kentucky in their wins. They're not going to have this easy time with a stout Cincinnati Bearcats team that is just hungry to go beat somebody up. And the line is sitting here at minus 16.5. These two teams played each other last year. Some fluke stuff happened where Indiana was actually dominating the game. They lose their best player to a targeting, their best defensive player to a targeting call. And then the game kind of flipped on them. But I think Cincinnati is going to come out here very poised, ready for a blowout after playing flat last week. The line for the game last year was 3.5. Now it's 16.5 for Cincinnati. And Cincinnati is, I think, is going to roll in this one. So give me Cincinnati minus 16.5 as the play.
Yeah, it's a great line spot, no question. Going my direction in this one, 3:30 p.m., we are going back to the Grease Fire specials where I seem to be living very well. UTSA minus 42 versus Texas Southern. UTSA comes home off a sequence of incredibly difficult games. Houston, Army, Texas. This team is a juggernaut waiting to burst out of really a difficult non-conference schedule to start the first 3 weeks. And you catch exactly where we buy these teams against FCS teams, against SWAC teams, against teams that are incredible bottom feeders. You look at Texas Southern. Texas Southern actually comes in here off a win last week, very similar to what we said about UMass. Texas Southern last year went 2-8. Both of their wins were followed up by blowout losses at SWAC opponents, not top-level FBS opponents. And also, you go back to last year, UTSA did have a corollary. Their only FCS home game last year against Lamar, they did win the game 54-0. You guys see these games. These teams run up the score. And it's not even really running up the score. It's just such a talent gap that these smaller programs, FCS programs, can't even compete. It's almost like a high school team. They're smaller, they're slower, they're not strong. The field is just wide open, and these teams just rack touchdowns over and over and over. UTSA at minus 42. I have this game graded over 49 to 50 points. It should get there around 54-0 yet again. 1 unit official. We're going back to the well. We're going on the road. We're no longer in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We are on the road in Boone, North Carolina. James Madison on the road. Guns, picks, and official.
Hey, JMU starting their inaugural campaign in the FBS off well. They are winning by an average margin of 47 points per game with a plus 337 net yard average. Granted, they haven't really played anybody. Middle Tennessee and Norfolk State, I believe, are the teams that they've played so far. But you got to look at this App State team. They've actually had to go through the ringer lately. So many close games, especially last week against Troy, which they won on an absolute fluke Hail Mary play, crushing the Troy State Dreams, a team that App State owned historically and crushed historically, almost losing the game outright at home. Now you have App State team. They love to run the ball. They run the ball with 4.9 yards per carry. We all know that. They have a 1-2 punch in the backfield. They also have a decent quarterback in Bryce. But what the issue is, and this is going to be a test for JMU, JMU is historically good at stopping the run. They're historically good as having defenses. Granted, they've had to do it with the FCS opponents, and they did it against Middle Tennessee State. They've given up 0.4 yards per carry so far this season. I don't care if you're a bad team, a good team, or a mediocre team. That's pretty damn good for a defense. And now they got to go against this App State team, which is the true test. You even go back to 2021 to see how they did against running teams. 2.6 yards per carry last year they only gave up. So this JMU team has a really good defense, and I think they're going to be able to stop the run, especially with App State going through the ringer of the competition. Very tough schedule, almost losing to Troy last week, getting the big win, storm the field. Hooray, everybody, we won a game. We beat Troy, who you're supposed to beat every single year. Now you're facing a JMU team that wants to make a statement that they are in the FBS. This team is going to be highly motivated, folks. So I'm taking JMU plus 7.5 as the play.
Yeah, and you talk about a false celebration. People were ripping the New York Giants for that. You go to Boone, North Carolina. When your team plays an absolutely lackluster game and barely wins as a minus 13.5 favorite, that is a false celebration at its finest. And I understand college kids that are not following the spread or anything like that. Jubilant moment. But James Madison is highly representative in their first campaign here in the FBS. Going the other side of the country, we're going to Pullman, Washington, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. I'm taking the first half here. Washington State, first half plus 3.5 versus Oregon. A lot going on here. Washington State is a tough out in Pullman. They're absolutely dominant in conference. Go back to last year. They did lose on the road to Oregon, 38-24. You get a revenge game coming in here on a short number. Last year, Oregon, laying 13.5 points, comes in here at 7.5. It should be around 9 or 10. It's short for a reason. Bo Nix comes in here, transfer from Auburn, showcasing an inability in a small window to play on the road. 49-3 hammer zone at a neutral site in week 1 against Georgia. Coming off of 2 home blowouts in the first half against Eastern Washington and a huge high last week where Oregon, at number 25 in the country, did hammer number 12 BYU. And you come to the other side of this game, you see a trend that is specific to the first half for Washington State. They might melt it late, which is a little bit of a fear of mine, but the gun is not worried. Guns picks, full game, +7.
Yes, I got this as a full game. Let me tell you why. Oregon is 2-1 straight up and against the spread this season. After a big home win against BYU last week, 41-20 plus 73 net yards. That was a must win for them, especially getting blown out by Georgia. It was a get right game. They got right, and now they're going to be a little bit lax going into their Pac-12 competition. Then this is a bad one. This Washington State team is 3-0 straight up this season after a big win last week against Colorado State. They also beat Wisconsin. You can say what you want about Wisconsin. Wisconsin always figures out with great defense, good offensive line, great running back in Allen, and they were able to still pull off the victory 17-14. Granted, they did lose the yardage battle in that game. Washington State has historically done well against Oregon. They've covered 10 out of the last 12 versus Oregon, and last year was a push at 14-point dogs on the road. Now they are +7 at home. So Oregon, first true road game. Let's keep that in mind. Granted, they did play neutral site game against Georgia. I am aware of that, but this is their first true road game. And they're 0-4 against the spread in the last 4 road games. Now you have Washington, and they are absolutely great against their conference. They're 7-1 against the spread versus conference opponents. Oregon likes to run the football, 5.5 yards per carry on the ground, 205 yards overall per game. Now, Washington has a solid rush defense. When you actually go into the numbers a little bit, they held 2 of their opponents to 1.8 yards per carry and 1.2 yards per carry. Wisconsin, when they played Wisconsin put up 174 yards on the ground. But if you actually look at their season average, that is 117 yards below their season average. Wisconsin usually puts up a lot more yards than what's let on. That was a good rush offense that Washington State faced in getting the W. Now, Washington State has a great passer too. Cameron Ward, 65% completion rate, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Oregon has struggled against the pass, giving up 70.3 completion rate, 277 yards passing, and barely puts pressure on the quarterback. 3% sack rate this season for Oregon. So you're going to give Cameron Ward some time. Those guys are going to get open. He's going to hit his targets. They're going to be able to run the ball. Washington State playing at home against a team they historically cover against. This could be a straight-up win here, folks. I'm getting it at +7. That's the play for me, but I wouldn't mind a little sprinkle on the money line there. Give me Washington State +7 as the play.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. And if you go back to last year, of course, slightly different roster groups, but in the conference opener on the road last year, Oregon did lose at Stanford at the same figure, -7. Total trap for Oregon, emotional letdown. It's a great look in Pullman at 4 p.m. Eastern. 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going cross country. We're going to Old Dominion, and we're taking Old Dominion -5, 1 unit, and the over 57. A lot going on here. And I keep mentioning this, but this is really what I do look at in college football, how the schedule flows from the beginning of last year to right now. And you have to go back to Old Dominion. Look, beginning of last year, this team was 1-6, and they were 0-3 in conference. They made a quarterback change. They inserted Hayden Wolf. And since then, they have really stepped up their game. They finished the season last year with 5 consecutive wins before losing to Tulsa in a bowl game. They switched conferences. They are now in the Sun Belt. And they catch Arkansas State coming in here in a brutal travel spot. Arkansas State, 3rd consecutive road game. Ohio State, Memphis, Now the conference opener at Old Dominion, and we are taking the over. Last year, Arkansas State had the same exact scheduling. They played Washington, then Tulsa, then went on the road to Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern was not an offensive juggernaut last year, and that game ended up 59-33. Arkansas State does not defend anybody. Old Dominion last week, somehow the game finished 16-14 against Virginia. There were 900 yards of offense in that game. And 2 weeks prior to that, against, I believe, Liberty, check me if I'm wrong, another extreme under where there were a ton of yards in the game. And I could have that wrong, but regardless, Old Dominion off these unders. This is not a great defense. They've gotten away with murder, situational turnovers. This is a track meet waiting to happen. And this is where Old Dominion with Hayden Wolf is a great home ATS team, catching Arkansas State in the back end of a road sequence, which is just an absolute death zone of travel. Old Dominion -5, over 57. 4 p.m., Guns Picks. Tulsa +21, catching Ole Miss. Fourth consecutive out-of-conference game. Conference opener next week against Kentucky. Tulsa, offense, and a bit of a trap for Ole Miss.
I think it's a classic look ahead game for Ole Miss here. Listen, I know what Ole Miss has done, especially against weaker competition. Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech. Those are the three teams they have faced this year. They have a +233 net yard average in this run. But the key about Tulsa here is Tulsa can stay up with you offensively. They have a great quarterback in Davis Brin. He has a 63.9% completion rate, 10.1 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, only 1 pick. That is a great ratio, a great stats. He also averages 413 yards passing per game. And granted, their competition has been a little bit weak as well. They've only played Wyoming, NIU, Northern Illinois for those played at home, and Jacksonville State. Those are the three teams that they've played so far. Now, with this Ole Miss team, if you can stop the run, you may be able to really keep this game close. And I think this Tulsa team can really do it. They've been able to hold their opponents to 3.8 yards per carry. So far this season, they've historically done well against the run. It's 21 points here. I think this is going to be one of those situations that really Mississippi's going to not completely play their best game against a lackluster opponent, especially when they got the SEC conference schedule coming up in the next week, and you're getting 21 here. So I like this Tulsa team. I think they can go tit for tat for Ole Miss. Give me Tulsa +21 as the play.
Yeah, it really is a great spot catching, again, an SEC team before their conference opener next week at Kentucky. It's a tough spot to motivate before really what is the hardest calendar within any conference in this country of America. Staying course, we're going 7 p.m. We're going UNLV on the road at Utah State. We're taking it 1 unit -3. Of course, we backed UNLV last week, a blowout against North Texas at home in Las Vegas. This is a team, again, that started 0-8 last year, mid-season, late season, caught wind, and they have sustained it this year. This is a absolutely juiced up program. And you go back to last year, Utah State did beat them on the road 28-24. Line functionality does tell you a story within these matchups. In that game, Utah State was -7.5 on the road. If you're expecting the same general weighting between the teams this year, Utah State should be -10.5 here at home. They're +3. They're telling you a UNLV story. And if you really look at what's going on here with Utah State is a down program this year. Last year, they showed signs. They did clean up on the middle ground quality of their schedule. When they played contenders last year, they got absolutely hammered at home. Boise State, BYU, to name two. But this year, it's gotten way worse. They opened the season at home against UConn. UConn, one of the worst perennial teams in FBS football. They were laying 25 points, and they only won the game 31-20. Then they went on the road and played Bama. They were down by 55 points through 3 quarters. Bama could have won that game by 80, and they just chose to back off in the 4th quarter. Then they came home, and this is the most egregious, disruptive point. Utah State last week, short favorite to FCS Weber State. Damian Lillard was not playing on that football team, and this football team won 35-7 against Utah State. Utah State is down. They are cratering. UNLV, revenge game, line number, by team, situational environment, 1 unit on the road, -3. 8 p.m., we are going Big 12. Again, Oklahoma hosting Kansas State. Guns picks plus 12, an official.
Look, we took Tulane. We told you to take them at 14.5. We told you to take the under, and guess what? Bang, bang. That's what happens, especially in look-ahead spots. Now you're at the look-ahead spot game, the circled game. The Kansas State was ready for it last week and forgot they had to play Tulane, but I think they're going to show up in this one. Listen, like I said, they lost last week straight up as a 14.5-point favorite, 17-10. But they actually tied as far as the net yardage goes. So they didn't really have a drop-off in the yardage. It was just complete, utter mistakes because you're thinking of Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma's 3-0 straight up, plus 32-point differential. They mauled Nebraska last week, a team that has basically given up for the 2022 season completely. They are the new Rutgers, is what I call them in the Big Ten. They played UTEP, Kent State, and Nebraska. So 3 lackluster teams. So their stats really, this is their biggest game of the year. Now you have this Oklahoma offense does allow their opponents to get a sack rate of 8.6. So they do allow you to get to the quarterback, and you have a Kansas State team that can actually go at you. So I think this is going to be one of those situations where Kansas State is going to really show up in Norman. Now, K-State lost to Oklahoma last year, 37-31 as 11.5-point dogs, despite winning the net yardage battle plus 28 in that spot. Now, Kansas State also has covered 4 out of the last 5 matchups, all as a double-digit dog. And 2 of those games, they won straight up in 2019 and 2020. They lost last year. This is a get-right game. This is a motivated game. This is a spot where Kansas State, I think, is going to be more ready, more prepared, more poised because they've been more challenged than Oklahoma has. And you're dealing with a new coach here. Venables is the new coach. And I think this is going to be one of those games where he's going to fall apart. And you're getting 12 here. I want to take it all day. Give me Kansas State plus 12 as the play.
I like it. It's a great fade spot, no doubt. As you mentioned last week, cleaning up on Nebraska is not telling you any sort of story for Oklahoma this year. My final play, we're going 10:30 p.m. We are going to the West Coast, and we're going up north. Washington, Stanford, over 63.5, as I dropped it on Twitter earlier this week. I thought this would actually get steamed up. It got pulled down. I don't really know why. As I mentioned, I don't really look at the reasoning behind other people's bets. What I'm looking at here, first of all, is a major shift from the game last year. Last year, Stanford played Washington, and the final was 20-13. And the total last year was 46. So the Vegas algorithms had the game graded as a low total, and it went under. Now it shifts to a complete over line. And you look at what Washington is doing this year. Michael Penix Jr. comes over here from Indiana and is just absolutely lighting it up. Last week, incredibly impressive performance, 39-28 against Michigan State. A ranked opponent coming into their home stadium, averaging over 45 points a game. You get Stanford coming in here off a bye, but Tanner McKee and the boys are going to want to score the football, and they're not going to defend the football at all. Their last game against USC, an over, 41-28. This game has points written all over it. It's a late night special. People will be drinking on the East Coast, hanging out on the West Coast. It's a 1.5 unit play per the Shark, over 63.5. Speaking of late night games, Guns picks, top play of the week. USC Trojans, Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley apparently are going to win the championship this year. However, they have to go through Corvallis first. Corvallis, a tough travel point. Oregon State, probably their best team in the last decade. +6, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Guns picks.
I tell you what, I love this Oregon State team. Yeah, I know I took Fresno State last week, but if you actually look at the outcome of that game, if you're watching it on TV, you'll see that their top quarterback, their star, their absolute rock, Jake Hayner, gets hurt in the third quarter while they're driving down the field. They were only down 11 in that game, and we had them at +13. So it was a great spot to take Fresno State, and I think that would have hit as long as we had Jake Hayner in there. Can't come back when you lose your star. Now, USC, like I said, coming off a 45-17 victory, but the game is a lot closer than that. Now you have them coming into this game to an Oregon State team that has typically owned them. The home team is 13-5 straight up. I said straight up in this matchup. Oregon State 4-1 against the spread as a home dog since 2020, and 8-1 against the spread in home games overall. USC 1-5 against the spread in their last 6 versus Pac-12 opponents, and 2-5 against the spread in their last 7 in Corvallis. So those are key points if you're looking at the trends. Now, Oregon State is a very balanced offense. This can beat you in the run game with 4.9 yards per carry. Great offensive line, one of the top ones in the country. Passing game, 9.9 yards per attempt. This is thanks to their offensive line that has given up a 2.5% sack rate to their opponents. So they're going to have time in the pocket. The quarterback's going to be poised, and they're going to be able to pound the ball versus a USC team that has struggled defensively, especially against the run, giving up 4.3 yards per carry to Rice, 4.9 yards per carry to Stanford, and 5.1 yards per carry to Fresno State. So I'm telling you what, if you're getting +6 in this spot, I think USC, to me, great offense. I'll give you that. But that defense is going to give that team fits to the point where USC is going to have to score so much that to stay in some of these games, and they're playing a very strong opponent here in Oregon State. I like this team a lot, and I think they're going to be a play-on team moving forward in the Pac-12 schedule, and I'm getting them at +6 at home. Give me Oregon State +6 as my top play this week.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. If you actually go back, of course, these teams do not play each other every year over the course of the last 20 years within the Pac-12. I believe they are on different sides of the conference. But the last 2 times USC played in Corvallis, they did win both of those games. You said they were 2-5 last 7. They were actually 2-0 last 2. And both those were double-digit wins. Mm-hmm. So that should tell you when the line is shortening up off theoretical domination in the last small window for USC on the road. Sharp look there. My top plays, 9 top plays, 9 words of lifestyle. Ride the wave out of the water. Noon, Auburn first half -4, Kansas -7, Temple catching UMass off a win, which is the absolute death zone spot, -9.5, UTSA -42, Washington State hosting ranked Oregon in a trap spot, first half +3.5, Old Dominion -5, over in the same game, 57. UNLV, we're taking them again on the road in a revenge game against a Utah State team that is really poor this year. -3, late night special, 1.5 units, over 63.5, Stanford at Washington. Guns picks at noon, Ames, Iowa, Iowa State -3, Duke +7.5. Some disagreement from us there. Top play at 3:30, Tennessee. Major buy spot by team in Knoxville. First half -6.5, game -10, 3:30 p.m. Cincinnati -16.5. James Madison staying the course with a bye team in their first FBS campaign, +7.5 on the road at App State. Washington State full game +7, Tulsa +21, K-State +12, and the late night special, Oregon State +6. CFB Knowledge for College week 4, 40 minutes in the books, 20 plays combined. An opportunity to dominate. Pleasure as always, Guns. Drop some language, drop some hype, close them out, and let's fucking go.
Like I said before, we are up +12 units as a show. Units. We're going to keep stacking up that cash all season long. And make sure you join me tomorrow morning, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. I will be doing my CFB live chat with all you boys. You bring the plays, I'll bring the opinions. And we'll do that for about 30 minutes every single Saturday. So please join up into the chat and get involved. Also, subscribe to the Dad Bods YouTube channel. Also, don't be afraid to comment on anything on Twitter as well. We try to answer all the comments that come along. So until next time on the Week 5 slate, let's cash some tickets this week, boys. And also, we'll see you Sunday, 10 a.m. NFL show, which will absolutely be electric too. Till then, peace.